Well, welcome to Logos Research Associates live stream broadcast. I'm Jay Siegert, president of Logos Research Associates, also director of the Starting Point Project, and it is my privilege to be your host for this particular program. And if you're not that familiar with Logos Research Associates, let me give you a quick rundown. Logos Research Associates is a fellowship of scholars and scientists that are committed to the upholding a high view of science and a high view of Scripture. We sincerely believe that scholarship, logic, and scientific method can and should be used to show that the Bible's historic claims are both credible and ultimately superior to the secular model of origins. Logos sponsors many creation research initiatives and projects involving many different experts in scientific disciplines, all working towards the goal of increasing the explanatory power of the biblical creation model of origins and of Earth history. The goal of our live stream broadcast is to provide you with the opportunity to hear from top researchers who will convey cutting-edge scientific evidence for the Genesis creation account. And that's what you're about to hear in a few minutes here. But before we get started, join me in a quick word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much for these opportunities we have to explore your creation and convey it to the rest of the world in a fascinating way that gives you honor and points to you as ultimate authority in our lives and in the entire universe. We thank you for all the research that has been done ahead of time and all the scientists who are willing to come on the program and convey what you've taught them through their research. We just thank you for all these things now and pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you a speaker for this particular broadcast. And I have to say, we're not live this time. We always are, but this particular time, because of time differences between the US and the UK, we are recording this one, which shouldn't make much of a difference to you other than when we do the Q&A. It won't be live, it'll be recorded, but you obviously are still watching this. So this one is not particularly live, but it'll be lively. And our speaker for this broadcast is Professor Andy McIntosh. He's a PhD in combustion theory. He's Emeritus Professor of Thermodynamics at the University of Leeds. His PhD is in combustion theory from the Aerodynamic Department of Canfield University. He's got a doctorate of science in applied mathematics, and then a whole bunch of more letters, some of which I'm not even sure what they mean, and it would probably take us a couple broadcasts to go through each one of them. It just means he's really, really smart. Also, he's an adjunct professor at Liberty University here in the United States, working on the bombardier beetle, which is absolutely fascinating. I'd say in advance, I wish we could have him come back and talk just about that, which I'm sure sometime we will. It's a fascinating study. But not only is he really smart, really nice guy. He and I have had the pleasure of speaking at some conferences together, and you can't help but be around him and smile. He's just a happy person. I love his presentation, so I'm really excited to be part of this broadcast and to hear what he has to share. I know that you'll be fascinated as well. So with that, I'm going to turn over the program to Professor McIntosh. Thanks for being on our program.
It's a pleasure to be with you all, and thank you so much, Jay, for sharing this tonight. And thank you to those who've been operating backstage in Logos Research Associates, not least Sarah Buckland and Fred Bauhoff, and also Zachary Klein, who I know do an awful lot of work backstage to make these things happen. So thank you to you all. And it's a great privilege to talk to you about migration. I'm just amazed. I'm bowled over when I actually looked into what's happening in the natural world. I've written a book which doesn't go into all the details that I'm going in today, but it does mention migration. It's the book on the left on this slide, The Wonders of Creation. I've written other books which are listed there. And you will see that although it says UK for the publishers at the bottom, all these, the one on the left and the one on the right are certainly available in the US. And indeed, I think you can probably, by searching a bit, get the middle one. But the one on the left is actually published not only in the UK, it's actually published by Masters Books in the US. So you can get hold of that one on the left, Wonders of Creation. And it's that one that has some interesting parts in it which you might be interested in reading about, including some aspects of migration, which I deal with. I haven't got it open in these slides at the migration page, but you will find that there is a number of interesting topics in that book. So you might like to get hold of that. Just a very quick word about myself. I've worked in the Royal Aircraft Establishment, a government establishment here in the UK. Many years ago, I worked on aircraft design and research at Cranfield Institute of Technology, where I took my PhD. And I know quite a bit about aerodynamics and airflow and things like that. Then I went on to do a postdoctoral work, both in wind tunnels and then eventually in combustion, which I then did at the University of Leeds. And as was mentioned in the introduction, I worked a bit on the Bombardier Beetle, and that combines both fluid flow and combustion, which is another topic. But it's relevant to a certain extent to migration, as we shall see, because some of the creatures that migrate I'm going to look at tonight are birds, of course, and bird flight is extraordinary. Two books which I'd recommend to you, one by a Christian, the one on the left, Eric Cassell, has done a lovely book summarizing a number of creatures, as you can see, turtles, which we will look at tonight, but many other creatures he studied. And so I owe an awful lot to Eric Cassell. He's a very interesting gentleman. I've read some of the things that he writes on an interactive email site that we have, engineering research group of the Discovery Institute. I'm on that. And he's always has very interesting things to talk about. Then this other book, which some of you might be able to get hold of, it's called Nature's Compass. The two people who wrote this are I think it's a married couple, James and Carol Gould, and they are not Christians as far as I can make out, but they actually make some very interesting observations concerning the way creatures find their way in the world, and that's really what we're about. Just to say that many years ago, probably one of the greatest scientists ever is James Clerk Maxwell, the professor of experimental physics at Cambridge. He started off in Scotland, and he died at 49, and he was an amazing gentleman. He actually in his lifetime achieved so much in that short life. He understood electromagnetism, and he understood many things about light and electricity and magnetism. Well, not electricity, but magnetism is going to come a bit into this talk. Another person who's highly relevant to this is Michael Faraday, who discovered the connection between electricity and magnetism. Now, these gentlemen that I've just quoted were godly gentlemen who believed in the Lord Jesus Christ and believed in the Bible. And James Clerk Maxwell wrote this on the Cavendish laboratories. Sadly, it's in Latin, but it's still there at the University of Cambridge, written on the wooden doors, as you can see in the picture. You won't be able to read it because it's in Latin. Well, at least most of us can't read the Latin. I wish he'd written it in English, but he writes Psalm 111, verse 2, "The works of the Lord are great, sought out of all them that have pleasure therein." He did his work, and so did Michael Faraday, to the glory of God. And that verse really summarizes what has been discovered, not by me, but by others, concerning migration. Many creatures migrate, as this picture shows. You've got whales, you've got Arctic terns at the top there, you've got amazing land creatures also migrating. And one of them's the caribou there that you can see, and you can see the wildebeest there on the right. But you've also got dragonflies, you've got eels and birds and many other creatures which migrate. Their paths across the oceans or across the land are marked here. I'm not going to dwell on this slide, but you might just notice that at the top of this picture is the UK. And you can see there that I would love to actually talk about all these creatures, but time won't permit me. But you may have heard of Brent geese. They travel a massive distance from England all the way to the northern part of Russia, right into the polar regions. And that's just one example. But if you notice another one, which is the one going across the Pacific Ocean, it's actually it's actually the leatherback sea turtle. We are going to look at turtles today, but they travel right across the Pacific, which is quite extraordinary. So there are some amazing journeys. As I just go into this subject, let me just mention to you the turtle dove. Now, why do I do this? Because the Bible refers to the migration of the turtle dove in Jeremiah chapter 8, verse 7. And this is what it says. Jeremiah is actually using migration to actually speak to the people and to say, you need to learn something, the Lord's people. Even the stork in the sky knows her seasons, and the turtle dove and the swift and the thrush observe the time of their migration. Then he says, but my people do not know the ordinance of the Lord, or we might say the judgment of the Lord. In the original language, it was translated initially as turtles, but of course it should be translated, which is why I've taken the NASB, the New American Standard Bible. It should be taken as the turtle dove. And this is a bird which is very beautiful. It comes into Israel, which is why, of course, Jeremiah was referring to it. And it knows its time of migration. The whole point of this reference is that these birds, which know their journey times, they arrive in April and then they depart south to Africa for the winter in October. He says these birds know when to leave. These birds know when it's right to turn and change what they're doing. But my people don't know their time. They don't sense the Lord's presence upon them. And he's referring to the fact that we need to learn from the creatures. God said to Job many years before this, he said, consider what God has made and how great God has made all these creatures. Consider the beasts. And we ought to consider the beasts. And there is a spiritual lesson which I'm going to be drawing out from these creatures. We've time for three creatures. We're going to look at turtles, we're going to look at butterflies, and we're going to look at birds. There are many other creatures, but we're going to look at these three. So first of all, turtles. Now, the turtle migration is actually, as I've indicated there, all over the world. There are some which go across the Pacific. There are some which migrate well into the Pacific from Australia. There are some, as you can see, which migrate up and down the east coast of Africa and South America. The ones we're going to look at are the ones in Australia, because I've got some interesting facts which I drew out from the loggerhead turtles in Australia, right? But then I'm going to finally look at the ones, as you can see, in the Atlantic concerning the science of how these turtles migrate. So the videos I'm going to show you are from a different location, from the ones which I'm going to talk about the science of how they do it, which is the ones in the Atlantic. It's just that this is where the present data is available. So I've called this the race for the sea. These little turtles are quite comic when they're born. They're tiny little creatures. And of course, many other predators know that what they're doing. And they actually hatch 2 months after being laid by their mothers on a beach at full moon. Then 2 full moons go by, so 2 months, and then they hatch and they have to race down to the sea. The videos I'm going to show you are from Australia, but then I'll talk about the way they track in the Atlantic. So let's watch these videos in Australia. This is Monrepos near Bundaberg in Queensland, Australia. There is a full moon, and we're going to see the comments here made by Tim Faulkner, who is a veterinary scientist who is actually taking a great interest in these turtles. So let's watch the videos.
The head is huge, and those flippers that are so designed for swimming turn into shovels.
So she's moving all 4 flippers. She digs about an arm length down, and it's about 2 handspans wide at the bottom, comes up to about 1 at the top.
We picture turtles being these slow, cruisy creatures, but you're talking 15 minutes to dig a hole, not 15 hours.
No, that's right.
It's a quick process. She's finished the hole, and then she rests her flipper up, and you can just sense that something's about to happen. 1 egg drops, 2 egg drops, 3, 4, 5, and soon enough, there's 20 to 30 eggs in the bottom of that chamber.
So we'll see if she's got tags, then we'll know if she's been here before.
It's an awesome spectacle that attracts visitors from around the world. But Tim and Kathy are here to carry out vital research.
Yeah, so she has got a tag, so we know that she's been here before. She's done a couple of breeding seasons.
Yep.
So yeah, it's great to see her back for another one.
Wonderful. Now we know who she is. It's time.
Now we'll go to the next one.
So we'll just loosen it up a bit.
On Monrepo Beach in Bundaberg, it's time for a new generation of endangered loggerhead turtles to start arriving.
So this is 2
We
months
should see
later.
the sand start to bubble soon. Little heads appear.
Oh, there we go. Look at that.
Wow.
So 2 months later, full moon again, twice over, of course, and she's timed it exactly for this. Now it's a race to the sea.
A female laid her eggs in this spot 60 days ago, and now the babies are starting to emerge.
Tonight, watching those females lay their eggs and the hatchlings pop their little heads up, it's a full cycle. And it's truly amazing. I do some special things in my job, but tonight, being here, just about tops it. Here they come. A whole lot of just about to hit me. What a sight. How they tickle.
They do tickle.
They're everywhere. There's so many of them, and they want out. They want in the ocean. They're almost at the water.
Just about there. Here we go. He's coming.
Wow, that was brilliant. Hey?
These tiny babies now face a tough battle for survival.
Less than 1 in 1,000 of these little hatchlings will make it to be an adult, and they're off.
It's hoped that at least some of the females in this group will reach maturity and one day return to Monrepo Beach to lay their own eggs and start the cycle all over again.
I have never quite seen anything like that.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be said, 50% of the world's loggerhead population breeds here, and that's because of the work you guys are doing. I mean, you've been here 20 years, so you're a big part of that, and good on you.
Oh, thanks, Tim.
That's quite an extraordinary series of videos, I think you'll agree with me. And it just sets the scene for trying to understand how on earth these turtles do it. And only until recently was it understood how the turtles track what's going on and where they're at. As I said, I'm now going to look at the ones in the Atlantic where a study has been done concerning those which hatch in one part of the South Atlantic well, in mid-Atlantic, I should say, and then actually migrate all the way around that, what is really a gyre, in order to get to where they're going to go to actually feed and to grow, and then eventually come back to where they have laid their eggs, or where they were born, I should say. So this study, which I'm now going to just go into here, we can't read it all, but the study, if you just look here, is it's called longitude perception, because that's the big issue in navigation. How do you work out where you are west-east as well as north-south? And longitude perception magnetic maps in sea turtles, Putman and co-authors, Current Biology 2011. Now, we can't read all that tonight, but what I can do is just emphasize one part of this. The bit in green says the loggerhead turtles have managed to surprise researchers by developing a method that involves using the strength and the angle of the Earth's magnetic field. So if you look at the paragraph before, it says several species of turtles are known to use magnetic cues to determine latitude. It was believed that this was not possible for longitude, which is going west-east, right? But what they found is that they do it for west-east as well as north-south. So it took human navigators centuries to figure out how to determine longitude. And that was, I love saying this to an American audience, it was James Harrison of the Royal Navy who worked out, and Captain Cook picked up his chronometers. He worked out how to actually work out what the time was wherever you were in the ocean, not just where you were, but also where you'd come from. So it was the time difference between London, the center of the universe, of course. I'm mocking or being sarcastic, but the time in London and the time out in the open Atlantic or open Pacific, wherever you were. And then you could work out by noting that it's the clock time where you are and the clock time where you'd left, you'd then be able to work out, because it's roughly 40 minutes per 10 degrees to actually go around the 360 degrees around the world. You then know where you are in terms of the map. So that turtles are obviously not using clocks. How are they doing it? Well, they're doing it by different means. They're not taking little clocks with them. There's nothing like that going on. But what they are doing is sensing not just north-south as we would with a compass. They're actually sensing the strength and the dip angle, or the inclination angle, of the magnetic field. Now, again, this picture is too detailed for you to see, so I'm going to magnify it, okay? And this time you can hopefully just see what's going on here. The colors, please look at this picture. The colors represent the intensity in bands of 2 microteslas, which is how you measure magnetic field. I won't go into the detail of that, but the intensity is actually changing in bands of color: the blue, the purple below, the blue, then the light blue, then the green, then the yellow, the orangey color, and then finally the red at the top. So that intensity is changing, okay? But if you'll notice, there is lines going across it, which are white lines. Now, please notice this. There'll be a test afterwards, and Jay will mark it, because I won't be here because this is recorded. Again, I'm just joking. I'm just pulling your leg. But the lines, the white lines, are inclination angles. So I don't know whether I'm on the screen. Yes, I am on the screen. If you watch my hand here, so The intensity is how strong that magnetic field is. The inclination angle is literally the inclination of the magnetic field. And as you go to magnetic north, that would point straight downwards. And if you're at magnetic south, it would point straight upwards, okay? But the inclination angle is also changing, but it's changing differently to the intensity. So there are two numbers here in two locations. And the locations, of course, one of them is the Cape Verde Islands that I mentioned at the beginning, right? The Cape Verde Islands. And then another location is just over near Cuba, which is on the west there. And those two locations have the intensity, which is the second number, and the first number, right, is the inclination angle. So if we look at Cape Verde Islands first, which is the one on the right, it's 26.1 degrees and it's 35 in terms of intensity, 35 microteslas. The one on the left near Cuba is 46.4 degrees, so it's much more inclined, and it's 39 microteslas. It's more intense. So those two numbers are acting like coordinates on a complicated magnetic map. So if I now take you to this picture, you can now see that the place on the west was Puerto Rico. It's not far from Cuba, at least relatively speaking. And you've got Cape Verde Islands literally on the same latitude, right? So how do they know whether they're in Cape Verde Islands or Puerto Rico? Well, what they did is they put that strength and inclination angle artificially in a great big swimming bath of water, and they fooled the little turtles to say, let's imagine that you're in the Cape Verde Islands. And lo and behold, they went southwest, okay, following the gyre, which we know these turtles do when they're going round the Atlantic Ocean. It takes them years to do it, okay? Then they changed the angle and they changed the strength of the magnetic field to simulate being in Puerto Rico on the west. And at that location, they should be going more northwards and slightly eastwards. And that's exactly what they did do. They started paddling in a different direction. So this showed that the loggerhead turtles knew what they were doing, even though they'd only just been born. This is quite extraordinary, would you not agree? This is quite remarkable that these turtles knew what they were doing. The females come back to exactly the same beach 20 or 30 years later because they sense their location by the strength and inclination of the magnetic field. Referring to that book, Animal Algorithms, I won't read you all the paragraph, but I would recommend that you get the book by Eric Cassell. Let me just read you the bit which is in yellow before I read the highlighted bit at the bottom. The hatchling turtles used in the experiment had never been in the ocean. So this experiment was done by picking up the turtles, the North Atlantic or the Atlantic turtles, loggerhead turtles, putting them in a swimming bath when they hadn't even actually started their journey, right? So that's important to realize. So they were not basing their navigation route on experience, following others, adults and others. This means that the navigation route is an innate programmed behavior. Please grasp that. The other point to realize is that now there are three subheadings here. There are three fundamental issues that we have to explain. That first point in yellow is staggering because these turtles have something pre-programmed in them, They haven't yet learnt it by experience. But now look at these 3 subpoints. They're fundamental. There is an imprinting of the turtle's home beach location in their minds, as well as knowing where they are on the map. They know where their home beach location is because 30 years later, the females get back to it. Number 2, they have the ability to detect both latitude and longitude from the Earth's magnetic field. So if you put them in a different location, they know where to go. They have a map sense. And thirdly, that the loggerhead sea turtles are programmed to swim in the most advantageous direction, depending where they are in their geographic location. So if you were to put them in the North Atlantic, they'd find the shortest route, taking account of currents as well, in order to get to where they need to go. So this is really quite amazing what turtles do. Time's moving on, so I'm going to move on to butterflies. And you'll see here that in the background there is the picture of the famous monarch butterfly, which you have in the United States. Butterflies are beautiful creatures. We have the phrase to have a butterfly mind. But actually, when you look at butterflies, you might think, oh, they don't know where they're going, which is where you get the phrase butterfly mind from. You know, they're just not thinking correctly. It's used like that. For when you want to be a bit disparaging about somebody, you say they've got a butterfly mind. But actually, butterflies do know where they're going. They're quite extraordinary. They look like very weak flyers, but actually, they're for their size, they're remarkable as to what they do. Butterflies migrate in America, well known that the monarch butterfly takes 3 to 4 generations to move north, and then in 1 generation, it migrates all the way at a different altitude, slightly higher altitude, and it's slightly larger than the ones which have made the journey north. It journeys all the way to one valley in the middle of Mexico where all the monarchs overwinter, and they're there literally in their tens of thousands. There are other butterflies, though, which migrate from Africa all the way through the UK, Europe, UK, and up to Norway and Sweden, and also to Iceland. Thinking of the monarch butterfly, it's the caterpillar is, of course, after the eggs have been laid, the egg goes into a chrysalis. We all know that, and the caterpillar then eats and eats and eats and increases its weight on milkweed, and of course it makes itself poisonous to other creatures, which is one of the reasons it feeds on milkweed, and it actually follows the growth of the milkweed as it begins to sprout, and the leaves come out in the spring into the summer, going northwards. The caterpillar increases its weight 2,700% in 20 days. That's quite something. The female butterfly can smell a male 2 miles away. And then if you look at the writing a little bit further down, it says, just highlight the main points here, the butterfly navigates alone to a never before seen location over 2,000 miles away. But it doesn't just do it in one step, that is, in 1 generation. It actually takes 3 to 4 generations, such that it's not even son, it's not even grandson, it's great-grandson, who finally gets up near British Columbia on the left, or in Canada, or else up into the northeastern part of the United States on the east. They split into 2 to 3 main groups. So this is really quite extraordinary what the monarch butterfly does. And the remarkable thing is, as I mentioned earlier, that the final generation, fourth or fifth generation, now comes back all in one go to Mexico, and it travels at a higher altitude and finally ends up back where great-granddad or great-great-granddad had been. Again, coming back to Eric Cassell, he says monarchs navigate using a sun compass. How do they do it? Well, they use a compass, which is to do with the location of the sun, and this includes time compensation to account for the movement of the sun. So if they're in the afternoon, they realize that the sun is moved over to the west, but they understand roughly where northeast is, or some of them are going northwest. And the comparison of the migratory monarch genomes with the genomes of non-migratory monarchs, and there are such, not all monarchs migrate, has revealed that there are more than 500 genes involved in migratory behavior. What happens if there's no sun? Well, when the sky is overcast, they use a magnetic compass as a backup source of navigation. And they do this by sensing, again, the inclination angle of the magnetic field to determine latitude. So this is quite remarkable that they are able to not only sense the sun's location and taking account of time of day, but also they can do it by sensing the magnetic field. Now, you thought that the monarch was the best of all. Well, I love saying this, that actually it's not the one that goes the furthest. There is one butterfly which beats them all. And this butterfly is a European butterfly. It's called the painted lady, and it migrates from the south of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. So it's going across the Sahara from parts of Africa below the Sahara, south of the Sahara, migrates across the Sahara Desert, keeps going through Spain, through France, and all the way up through England and beyond. This is a picture of a painted lady butterfly. I've seen them in our garden, and they are beautiful butterflies, just as beautiful as the monarch. And they migrate this huge distance. It was discovered in 2012 that it flies from tropical Africa, as I indicated, Nigeria and places like that in sub-Saharan Africa, to the Arctic Circle in the autumn, and then returns, in the autumn, goes through in the spring and the summer, right? With not just 3 to 4 generations, but it can even be 6 generations to migrate a phenomenal 15,000 kilometers or 9,000 miles, which is more than the monarch butterfly. Then, just like the monarch does, in 1 generation, it will make the journey back again across the Sahara Desert, be a slightly larger butterfly for that, as it is with the monarch, until it reaches back to its overwintering ground in the sub-Saharan part of Africa. This is an amazing journey, but these butterflies do it each year. Well, now I come to the last group of creatures, and of course that is the birds. And I want to talk to you about some amazing migrations in birds. Somebody has once asked the question, why do birds fly south in winter? Well, why do birds fly south in winter? Some wit gave the answer, because it's too far to walk. Well, we'll leave that, but let me say this after you've had a little bit of a cackle over that. Let's just remind ourselves that it was 2 great Americans from Dayton in Ohio which understood how to do flight and how to build a heavier than air machine. They weren't aeronautical engineers. If I had a live audience, I'd ask you and I'd say, well, what was their expertise? Well, actually, they were, as you probably know, most of you, bicycle engineers. And they did their experiments on flight. Here they are going to work in their bowler hats in North Carolina. They went to North Carolina and they took all the parts for their prototypes of aircraft and tested them at Kitty Hawk off the coast of what was then the mainland of North Carolina, and it still is, of course. But if you go there today, there are roads now going to the place where they did all the testing. So it's very easy for us to get to the location where they were, where they did their testing. But in those days, they had to take a boat and get to the islands off North Carolina. Why did they go there? Well, it's because there was a nice lot of wind and they needed some help from a good wind in order to get their initial machines up in the air. They did some wind tunnel tests. Wilbur and Orville Wright were clever people. Wilbur was really the biggest brains, I would say. He knew that he needed to understand how aerofoils worked. And what he did was he built a machine where he was actually mimicking the wings of birds, which he had observed, and he had copied the way they changed the camber of their wings using muscles. And he used a series of ropes and pulleys in order to change the shape of the right-hand wing different to the left-hand wing, which would then cause the aircraft to roll. You also put a rudder, which is there at the back. You can see two vertical surfaces at the back. But at the front, he also had a second lifting surface. We normally would put it at the back near the rudder today, but you do need two lifting surfaces in order to operate pitch. So he was controlling pitch, roll, and turning. And you can see the place at Kill Devil Hills in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, where they made their first flights. The first flight was 120 feet. The second flight the same day was 175, third 200, and then over 850 feet, where it ended up nose up, but they soon got it working again. And it's a tremendous memorial. It's well worth going to. My wife and I went there last year in 2024. Back to birds, the migrating of birds, which of course, since Wilbur and Orville Wright had made their first flight, people have also understood this for our own man-made machines. But migration and long distance flying means you need to know what you're doing. And today, if you're going to actually track what an aircraft is doing, sometimes you can follow an aircraft, what it's doing on apps that we have today. But in order for an aircraft to make long distance flights, it's got to know its position, and it will actually put in a flight plan to the flight controllers to say, this is what my plan is. And today we have very sophisticated cockpits which actually keep track of position, keep track of altitude, and keep track of speed and all the other things that we need to know. To make a long journey, you need to have a map. You need to have a compass. You need to know where and how far you're going, and you need to know the weight of the fuel. So you need to have a map. Remember this. Jay's going to test you. Compass. You need to know where you are on that map and how far you're going, and you need to know the weight of the fuel. So these four things are very important: map, compass, how far or where you are on the map, and the weight of fuel. Because you can have a compass, but if you don't know where you are on the map, you're going to make a right pig's ear of your journey, and you could end up with disaster. So map, compass, where you are, and weight are very important. Now, there are a number of birds which migrate. I'm just going to mention, just very briefly, birds which don't go that far and struggle with their journeys, right? This first bird I'm going to mention is the swallow. It doesn't fly very fast. It covers about 200 miles a day. It's mainly going through daylight, and it actually struggles with the journey because it's actually aiming to travel across the Sahara Desert. I say not very far. Actually, it is quite a distance, but it's not going very far each day. That's the point that I was making. And many birds don't make it because the birds are waiting, which prey on these smaller birds, and some of them don't make it because of storms and difficulty in crossing the Sahara Desert. But that's one example. It's not going very fast each day, but it is making a long journey all the way from England all the way down to South Africa, which is a good distance of about 4,000 or 5,000 miles or so, maybe 6. Another bird which migrates, and you'd be surprised at this, it's a hummingbird. And these birds are small, and again, they don't fly a huge distance each day. But these birds normally eat their own body weight, or drink, I should say, nectar, their own body weight each day. But when they're migrating, they increase their body weight by 25 to 40%. And in migration, they generally fly again during the day and sleep at night, roost at night in the trees. But these birds still make a remarkable progress. One of them, and I'm just going to highlight it, is the rufous hummingbird, and that flies across the Mojave Desert in the west in California. And this bird still makes it. And yet another one which migrates is the ruby-throated hummingbird, which flies across the Gulf of Mexico, a distance of 600 miles. It weighs in at a fraction of an ounce, and yet, even though it's burning fuel at an enormous rate, which is its own fat, it quickly can make that journey and get across the Gulf of Mexico. Even though it's burning fuel very, very fast, it is able to make that challenging journey for its size of 600 miles. Let me move on to a somewhat bigger bird, and this is what you call in America the red knot. We would call it a sandpiper, but that's the way things go, and you've decided to call it a red knot. And obviously, the red is very appropriate because it has a very strong red breast or orange breast, and it flies a distance of about 9.5, or just under 9,500 miles, which is a long distance. And it generally flies in 2 stages, stopping off in Central America from North America all the way to the tip of South America. An amazing journey that it makes, but it gets there, and it goes all the way down to Tierra del Fuego, which Darwin sailed round and visited, in fact, in his day, not far from the Galapagos Islands. So way up in the north of Canada, it will come down to Delaware Bay and then through to Central America. Some of them actually go from Central America to Delaware Bay, and then they go all the way down to Tierra del Fuego. But what is interesting is that people have observed that these sandpipers change the size of their stomachs. Part of the stomach is the gizzard, and they actually reduce that gizzard when they are going to migrate. Before they migrate, they feed and feed and feed, and they grab whole, gobble up whole shells of fish, shellfish, with the shells as well. And their hard duty gizzard is, it has acids which digest that shell and all. And then they reduce the size of their gizzard and their stomachs and other organs, and then they make their long journey. And it's reckoned that a red knot can halve the size and weight of its digestive organs. How about this, though? This now raises an issue, because I'm going to tell you about the Pacific golden plover. This is a small bird, not as big as the red knot or the sandpiper, perhaps not that much smaller, but just a little bit smaller. The Pacific golden plover would be probably about not more than 18 inches long, and the sandpiper could be as much as 2 feet. So that is 24 inches. But the Pacific golden plover migrates between northern Canada, Alaska, even, crosses a large part of the Pacific, about 3,000 miles, and makes its way to none other than Hawaii for its holidays. Now, if you were to try and fly that distance in a light plane, you would have to be extremely careful to have enough fuel. You would need to be sure that you had the compass such that you could know where you were on that map that I talked about. And you need to be extremely careful about the weight of fuel that you are taking. Remember, I said to you earlier that there are a number of issues concerning making a long journey. You need to have a map. These birds somehow know where Hawaii is. You need to have a compass. You need to know where you are on that map, and you need to have the right weight of fuel. So remember that: map, compass, where you are on the map, and weight, which is your fuel. Now, if you were trying to make a journey in a light aircraft, you would actually have to fill up everywhere with fuel in order to make that journey. You'd also be probably pretty scared about flying across water, where you could be ditching in the water miles away from anywhere. You've got to take account of winds and being pushed off course. There is a great number of dangers. The amazing thing about these birds is that the adults go on ahead. The young have never made the journey before, and yet the young get there without any problem. This is utterly staggering. The birds tend to fly in V formation, such that they reduce the amount of energy that each individual bird has to use in order to this isn't Pacific golden plovers, this is actually Canada geese, but it shows you what I mean by flying in V formation. And these Pacific golden plovers do the same. They actually fly together in order to make sure that they've got a little bit of reserve in case things go wrong and they need more, perhaps to go a slightly circuitous route because of winds. But they get there and they know what they're doing. This is really quite extraordinary that these birds are able to do it. So I would like to suggest to you that these birds working with a map in some way and a compass, which we haven't commented what that is, they are still knowing where they are on the map, even when they're going over open ocean. And they knew how much they had to eat, which is what their fuel is, turned into fat, before they started the journey. Well, if you thought that was remarkable, let me comment on another bird which says, oh, no, I'm not going to Hawaii. I'm going to go to Fiji. Well, Fiji is a huge distance. You see this red point here? This is about 2/3, 3/4 of the way from California through to Sydney. If you've ever made that journey in an aircraft, it takes an awful long time. It's a massive distance. It's a big journey. And this bird takes this 5,000-mile journey. It's the bristle-thighed curlew, and it's probably, with its beak, it's a good 3 foot long. And again, the same thing applies. With pinpoint accuracy, they get to Fiji, which is a tiny dot in the open ocean. They have a feeding frenzy when the chicks are born. They reduce their gizzards like the other birds that I mentioned, and they fatten themselves up. Somebody has likened these birds to flying softballs when they actually do get to where they're going. They migrate, some of them from Alaska, as well as from a little bit further south. And the young birds find their way across open ocean. This is staggering. Well, which bird takes the cookie for the longest distance? Well, Arctic terns fly all the way, did you know, from the North Pole to the South Pole and back each year. The difference is, though, they're not doing it non-stop, but still it's a remarkable journey. The Arctic tern migrates 12,000 miles each time, going out and 12,000 miles back. Coming back to Nature's Compass, the book that I mentioned at the beginning, they complete a round trip in the yellow here of 25,000 to 30,000 miles. Based on banding information, the oldest known Arctic tern was 34 years old, which means that it probably accumulated 1 million miles in its lifetime. So it's got some good status with the airlines, hasn't it? Frequent flyer miles now has reached 1 million. So I think we should give it an upgrade award for that. But joking apart, it does mean that some of these birds will have actually flown so far that they could have gone to the moon and back in their lives. And indeed, 1 million miles would actually be, of course, to the moon and back twice. Quite remarkable for that 34-year-old Arctic tern. But perhaps the one which really takes the cookie is the one that flies the furthest non-stop. The Arctic terns do stop on the way. In fact, some birds of prey know that they're coming through the Mediterranean, and sadly, they get dive bombed on by peregrine falcons who will take out the weakest ones, and they don't all make it. But the bar-tailed godwit does the journey non-stop, and it travels 7,700 miles across the Pacific in 6 days, averaging over 1,000 miles each day, which is a staggering achievement. But there was another one which was banded a bit later in 2021, and they found out that this particular bar-tailed godwit, Cassell's bar-tailed godwit, made the flight of 8,100 miles non-stop. And autopsies on some of these birds which didn't make it, not because they were shot at or anything like that, but some of them had flown into radar domes and had hurt themselves and sadly died. But autopsy showed that the birds had reduced their gizzards, their livers, their kidneys, and their guts to minuscule levels. And as I said earlier, they were like flying softballs, which were basically just fat, such that they become eventually, when they get to New Zealand, they're flying from Alaska to New Zealand, they are really flying skeletons. Flight requires a lot of things to be right. In a separate talk I do on flight, I mentioned the amazing muscles that birds have. They have an extra muscle for the upstroke, the arrows in blue here, which is the supracoracoideus muscle. Without those muscles, these birds wouldn't be able to operate the way they do, flying huge distances. Keeping those muscles going requires energy, and that energy, of course, gradually gets used up. They have this pulley system for operating their flapping motion. I'm just going to put up one set of equations. You don't need to go and get an ice cream and say, oh, I'm going to not listen to this bit, because I'm going to summarize it by just showing you something which is the essence of this. Please don't worry about the bit at the top. The engineers here who are watching will understand what I'm doing. I'm talking about the rate of change of the mass being proportional to the mass. But don't worry too much about this. The X is important. Look at the last line here. The distance that the bird can make is proportional to its speed, but inversely proportional to the amount of loss in mass per hour, right? Now, for the bar-tailed godwit, it's about 0.5%. So over 24 hours, right? Well, that's going to be roughly just a little over 10%, maybe 11%, somewhere in that region. It loses per day. So you can see that the limit of the bar-tailed godwit is to be flying 7 or 8 days would be the utter maximum, because it's just going to be a flying skeleton when it finally gets across the Pacific. But it's got a very low loss mass per hour. So the distance is inversely proportional to that percentage loss. So having said that, let me just show to you this plot, which is the bar-tailed godwit, its flight range, which was the Y that I mentioned, is proportional, yes, to its relative fuel load. So if you go up in fuel load, you could fly a greater distance. But the biggest difference is actually the X, which is much less on the blue line than the red line. I think the red line is about 1%. For the bar-tailed godwit is about 0.5%. So your distance is actually heavily dependent on this weight loss per hour. So if I put this chart up, and hopefully you can see it and understand this, might be good to have this magnified and put me out of the picture briefly so you can see the chart on the right. The estimate in this table of X, which is the body mass fuel consumption, right? You've got the X, which is the third column. Please note that the black-tailed, a blackpoll warbler, I said 1%, actually it's more like 0.56, right? But the nightingale is 1% loss per hour. The bar-tailed godwit is the least, it's just under 0.5%. And look at the red knot, which is 0.77. But if you look at the ruby-throated hummingbird, which is the next to last line, it's 2% per hour. So in 24 hours, if it was flying non-stop, certainly in 12 hours, it would have lost a quarter of its weight. But if you're trying to cross the Gulf of Mexico, like the ruby-throated one was, well, in 24 hours, it would have lost half its body weight. So you've got to get there quickly at that rate. But it does very well, as you gathered. Let me now just move very quickly to close this, because I want to show you that the one who takes the cookie, the biscuit, as we would say in England, but you say the cookie in the United States, is the bar-tailed godwit, which makes the longest distance. Let me just play you this video, which really demonstrates the amazing ability of the bar-tailed godwit to fly right across the Pacific, and it gets there without any problem. And I'm going to close off by showing you how it does it with the magnetic compass.
Yes, it's a she. Beautiful big bill. Straighten that leg out.
Ah, she wants to go. This is a bird that's flown as far as the moon.
She's been caught
This
before.
one's been caught here before.
She's been round and round the world 13 times.
So how old could she be?
Well, she could be 15, 20 years old.
And in one epic flight, she's come here to Miranda, New Zealand, almost 12,000 kilometres non-stop.
She spent 8 days without feeding, without drinking, flapping all the time, not going to sleep properly, maybe switching off one side of the brain and keeping the other side active. This is unequivocally the longest known flight of any bird in the world.
From Alaska to New Zealand and back again every year. A remarkable journey for an unassuming little bird. We think of them as ours, but they're really just here on mudflats all around New Zealand to get fat over summer. Very fat.
They're clinically obese. 50% of their body weight may be fat.
Before flying to the Arctic to breed.
They have to somehow combine extreme obesity with extreme athleticism, which is something that humans can't do.
Why do godwits get so fat? Last year, biologists...
Well, we'll leave that point there, but I think that's a lovely little clip which shows you what these birds are doing. As I close, how do these birds sense where they are at on the map? Remember, I said you need a map, you need a compass, you need to know where you are on that map, and you need to be sure that you've got the weight of fuel right. Well, these birds sense the intensity of the magnetic field. They sense the inclination of the magnetic field. But quite remarkably, some birds sense the declination of the magnetic north as different to geographic north. Geographic north would be the dividing line between west and east, as the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So the birds know where geographic north is, but magnetic north is different. But you've got three coordinates. Basically, the strength of the field, the inclination of the magnetic field, and the declination angle gives you three coordinates that these birds can use. This study by some Russians in Current Biology in 2021 called Navigation by Extrapolation of Geomagnetic Cues in a Migratory Songbird actually showed that the warbler, it was a particular warbler that they were studying, actually shows that when they changed artificially what the magnetic field was in terms of strength, in terms of which direction it was facing, and they would actually simulate the conditions out in the open for these angles. So they would then know that they had artificially put these geomagnetic cues into this great big hangar that they did these tests in. They found that these birds were sensing all these angles of the magnetic field. It's quite extraordinary. So if we just blow this slide up a bit, you can see magnetic north may not necessarily be the same as geographic north. You've got the inclination angle and the intensity, as we mentioned before, for turtles. And these birds are able to sense it. Just to indicate what the magnetic field is doing at the magnetic North Pole, you've actually got lines which are coming from your north magnet, which is actually facing towards the South Pole, and the lines then go up and go inwards and at a greater angle near the North Pole itself, and of course up, directly upwards from the magnetic South Pole. So the tilt gives you a measure of latitude. Remember, I said that that is an important angle, but what is most amazing is that you also need the other angles in order to work out where you are west-east. You need the intensity of the magnetic field, and you also need to know if you're if you are actually looking at the same latitude where you are longitude wise, you actually will need a third measure, which is this declination angle. Well, this raises big issues because the magnetic field of the Earth is actually gradually decaying, and it's approximately 5% in each 100 years. So that raises a lot of issues as regards the sustainability of this migratory pattern in birds. But the birds have been doing it not for millions of years. According to the Bible, there was a worldwide flood of the order of 4,500 years ago. So actually, this gradual reduction of 5% in 100 years is consistent with the world, with the age of the earth. According to the Bible, everything fits that the birds have been doing this for 4,500 years since the splitting up of the continents, which most of us believe occurred at the worldwide flood. So as we close, there is a variation in the magnetic field, and there is a sloshing in the magnetic field, but it has been shown that actually by Russ Humphreys that this sloshing effect wouldn't affect the overall reduction in the magnetic field, though that the field is fading. And for an evolutionist, that would be fading so fast that if you were to go into hundreds of thousands of years back, you would have such a strong magnetic field that we wouldn't be able to sustain life on the planet. But everything is consistent with a worldwide flood 4,500 years ago, and there being a sustainability of, for a few thousand years, of a reasonable strength magnetic field such that the birds can actually achieve what they do each year. So I'd like to now end by saying this. The bird that I said took the cookie was the bar-tailed godwit, but the turtles showed wonderful prowess in the way that they made their journey, again using the magnetic field. So did butterflies. And the birds obviously were sensing the magnetic field. We believe that it's with magnetite, which is Fe2O4 chemically, and it's held in the beak of the bird. That's what people have found for birds. It's also found, magnetite is found in butterflies. Don't think they've yet sourced where it is with turtles, but this is how these creatures are sensing the field. The works of the Lord are great, I said at the beginning, sought out of all them that have pleasure therein. As I close, let me mention that there were 4 things that you needed for a journey: a map, a compass, where you are on the map, the right weight of fuel. Spiritually, you've got a journey to make. All of us need to have a map, and that map is the Bible. Spiritually, you need a compass to work out your direction. And Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Let me ask you, do you know where you are on the map of life? Have you been born again? Have you believed in the Lord Jesus Christ, whom the Bible says died on the cross that you might be forgiven? He is the way. You need a pilot in your cockpit to guide you home to heaven. Otherwise, you could end up in disaster and end up in the place which the Bible calls hell. Jesus took my judgment, my punishment on the cross that I might be forgiven. The right weight of fuel is also important. You need to be kept, and you need power. Spiritually, where does that power come from? It comes from God himself. So let me encourage you to believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. Remember those birds that Jeremiah said were going the wrong way? And he said, sorry, I beg your pardon, the birds were going the right way, but the people were not. And he said in that wonderful verse in Jeremiah, right at the beginning of my talk, he says that these birds know what they're doing, but you don't. These birds know their time and they observe the time of their migration, but my people don't know their time. May I encourage you, therefore, to believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, because without him, we are lost. Thank you for listening to me. May God bless you all. And it's been a real privilege to speak to you tonight.
Well, thanks a lot, Professor McIntosh. It's amazing. He's scratching the surface. These are awesome things, and I personally think the very last thing he shared there is probably the most important takeaway message. When we all die and stand, and we're likely kneel before God. He's not even going to be asking us about these details of creation so much. It's going to be one thing on the table, and that'll be, who is Jesus Christ and what do we do with him? So I'm glad that you wrapped up that way. So many things are going through my mind. We are in just a second going to be going over a little quiz to see how well you were paying attention to what Professor McIntosh was presenting. But one thing about all this, we hear a lot of talks about the intricacies of design and all that. I think we as Christians, when we're conversing with others, need to take it a step further and just ask the person that we're talking to, okay, you recognize these details here. Please step me through all the processes and stages that needed to occur to go from some creature having none of these features to having all of the features. Because we often hear phrases like, well, this creature developed this, or this feature appeared, or it came about. And those are fuzzy words. Like, okay, tell me, how did this creature develop it? Sounds intentional. Like, okay, I'm going to need this, so let me do something. So we need to take these things that Annie's just presented, think through them, understand them a little bit better ourselves, and then just ask very graciously the skeptic, help me understand how all this developed by undirected processes of nature, because that would be their view. So this is awesome. I have some questions and comments myself, but I'm going to save those until we go through the quiz. So Andy, why don't you step us through the quiz that will relate to what you just presented, and we'll put the questions up on the screen here. First would be, how do turtles navigate back to the beaches where they were hatched 30 years before? So you can ask the audience, how did this happen? And then you can give them the answer.
It's the overlapping map. There's two maps, basically. There is the map of the intensity, which was the colors on that picture that I showed earlier. And those colors are not following exactly latitude lines. They're going across other lines, which were the white lines of my picture, which were the intensity, sorry, I beg your pardon, the inclination of the magnetic field. So it's the combination of the magnetic field intensity and the magnetic field inclination, that is the angle it makes with the horizontal. It's that which is frankly amazing. I was, when I found that out, I was completely bowled over. I thought, wow, the intensity is one map, right? It's changing color, and it's crossing over white lines of inclination. And these turtles know that an inclination combined with the intensity actually pinpoints where you are in the Atlantic Ocean. So it was the magnetic field. And where do these turtles get that map from? It's got to have been provided somehow in the information in their DNA. It's quite staggering what's what Eric Cassell brings out in his book Animal Algorithms, where he discusses this.
That relates to a thought that I had. We talk about, all the details you just shared, that these turtles are detecting, the intensity and the inclination and all that. Okay, fine. So there's something in their biology that can sense those things. Okay, that in and of itself is very, very, very complex. But now the brain has to take that just raw data, it's just information, just data sitting there, and it has to give it meaning by doing very complex calculations. And then when it does that, it kind of knows what it's supposed to do, but now the brain has to send signals to the rest of the physiology of the turtle to get everything to move just the right way to accomplish what it knows it needs to do. And those are not things that happen by accident. That's unbelievable programming. And in that first fertilized egg, that's all got to be pre-programmed in there to come about at the right time in its maturity.
See, if I said that, Jay, you've got to go to a particular coordinate, longitude, latitude on the map, you've got to work out, well, what does that mean in terms of you've got to put a grid over that map to work out where you are at. It's one thing to have the data. It's another thing to transfer the data onto a map, which shows how that changes depending on location. So you then know where to go.
Right. And you have to, you don't just do that once. Okay, I'm good to go. I know what I'm doing. No, you have to constantly, because, currents are pushing you one way or the other. So you're constantly reading those data points, constantly redoing calculations and readjusting to make sure you stay on course.
Yeah, exactly. Navigation before the advance of GPS and satellites that we have today. Navigation during the Second World War for bomber pilots, as they were flying at night without many cues on the land, they got lost very easily because sometimes you couldn't see the stars. Sometimes you used the stars even. Pilots or navigators in these bombers, like in your I don't know. I mean, I immediately think of Lancasters. I'm trying to think of the equivalent in America. Your flying fortresses, So if you're a navigator at night, you would have to work out by some means or other where you were with a map to actually track where you were on the map. You might do it by dead reckoning, saying, well, we've been going so fast for this amount of time, so we reckon we must be over here. And they got it wrong very easily. Navigation is not simple.
Great. Let's go to the second question. How many generations does the monarch butterfly take to journey through North America and back?
Well, it's 3 or 4 generations going forward, and then the final generation could be the 4th or the 5th, which then does it all back in one hop. And that's a remarkable journey. The monarch butterfly is doing something extraordinary. And I don't know whether you picked up, but the monarch, that generation, that last generation, is slightly bigger because it's making a longer journey. It needs slightly bigger wings in order to do it, because it's got to have the right amount of nectar, right, for that last generation. It's got to be bigger, have sufficient power in order to get all the way back. And it flies slightly higher.
Yeah, they call it the Methuselah generation, as the prior generations lived 2 to 4 weeks. And then the Methuselah generation lives up to 9 months long, as it needs to. Like, how did it need to,
Exactly.
How did it knows that it needs to do that? It's amazing.
Just staggering. There are cues going on biologically which are not well understood yet.
Sure. Next question. What butterfly beats the monarch in terms of round trip distance?
Well, I was obviously just having a little dig at the you guys in the US, that we've got a European one which goes further, 9,000 miles, I think it was that I said. And it's the painted lady butterfly, which comes from sub-Saharan Africa all the way through to the Arctic. It's just incredible. And that takes 5 or 6 generations before the last generation, again, the same deal, makes the journey all the way back to Africa, slightly bigger and flies slightly higher, gets back to where it all started from.
Absolutely amazing. Next question. What 4 things must you have right to fly a long journey?
Well, I think you all hopefully were picking this up as I said it, that you've got to have a map. You really must, you can't do anything without some idea as to what the journey involves. And that for that you need a map. You also need a compass to know the direction. You also need to know where you are on the map. So it's one thing to have a map, but where you are on the map is very important. And you need a cue or some way of pinpointing where you are. Let me illustrate. I went up into the hills and the mountains of the Lake District in the northwest of England a year or so ago, 2 or 3 years ago. And I made the mistake of not taking a compass with me, but I did have a map, right? I was with my wife initially. I left my wife and I went on my own, which was not a good idea because the weather set in, the mist came down, and I couldn't work out where I was. And I needed to get back. The rain was beginning to come on. Very helpfully, the weather just broke, the clouds just broke a little bit, and I actually went up higher to identify where I was. I went back to where I'd been because I wanted to find out where a certain lake, which was on the map, which direction it was in reality. And I got my bearings. Once I knew, I think it was Lake Buttermere, if I remember rightly. And it's one of the lakes in the Lake District. And I thought, right, that's Lake Buttermere. That's in that direction. My map says that it's there. Now I know where I'm going on the map. I know where I am on the map. Now I can then make my way down. But just for a while, I was all, I was actually a little bit frightened because I knew full well that I needed a compass. By actually pinpointing a location, I was effectively getting a compass bearing on my map. But actually, if I'd had a genuine compass, I'd been able to actually tilt the map the right way and say, right, I should be going in this direction. So this point about where you are on the map is a very important point. But there's a fourth one, which is, which this applies particularly to flying. It didn't apply so much to when you're on the ground, although obviously all of us can get tired and run out of food. But it's very critical when you're flying because you can't go to the local gas station. If you're halfway across the Pacific, you've got to have got that fuel right to begin with. So the right weight of fuel is very important. So map, compass, where you are on the map, and I'm stressing that. That's very, very important, number 3, and having the right weight of fuel.
Yeah, great stuff. It made me think of a semi-funny joke about it's important to know where you are. There was a story of a guy looking for a certain restaurant, couldn't find it, stopped at a gas station, or petrol, or you, I guess, a gas station, and asked, and he said, hey, you wanted to get to a certain restaurant, and the gas station owner said, oh, if that's where you want to go, you don't want to start from here. It's kind of funny, but it's important to know. You might have the right directions, but if you're starting in the wrong place, you're not going to get to where you need to go. So next question. What birds reduce the size of their internal organs in preparation for migration?
Yeah, well, it's actually a number of birds do it, but certainly the red knot does it, and the bristle-thighed curlew does it, and by all accounts, the bar-tailed godwit does it to an extreme because it's flying a huge distance, getting on for 8,000 miles right across from the northeast of the Pacific in Alaska all the way down to New Zealand, which is in the southwest. And they, if you heard my talk or you listened to the words I said, they make their inner organs minuscule compared with what they were. So those 3 birds at least do it, and there are many more which will do the same.
Sure. Yeah. And a side note with that, just getting the skeptic to think through things. How does Darwinian evolution explain that? If you had some bird that somehow learned to reduce its organs, that's not going to help it. If it doesn't need to make this long flight, it just reduces its organs. That's not good. But if it does the flight, but it hasn't learned how to reduce its organs, it's not going to make it. So both have to be there pre-programmed ahead of time, which is only a creation narrative.
Totally with you, Jay. Yeah,
True.
very well said.
Next question. Which bird travels the greatest distance in migration?
Well, if you're not talking about non-stop, then the greatest distance is the Arctic tern. It flies from the North Pole to the South Pole. That's a distance of 12,000 miles. And then, of course, back again. It's a total round trip of 25,000 miles or thereabouts. But that is a remarkable feat. And actually, it does raise the issue. I've just mentioned this before we move on. Not all birds in the same species do the same thing. The Arctic tern generally does do this. And in fact, I think all Arctic terns do fly from one pole to the other. But in terms of the bar-tailed godwits, some of them don't necessarily migrate. So it raises a lot of issues as to why some of the birds are doing it when their food sources could be obtained within reasonable distances at a much smaller distance. It seems that something is ingrained in these birds from generations before. Maybe God has deliberately allowed such variety of behavior in birds to give the glory to him. But anyway, the one that does the greatest distance is the Arctic tern.
Okay, I think we have one more question, and that is, which bird travels the greatest distance nonstop in migration?
Well, if you were listening, I've mentioned it already 2 or 3 times. It's the bar-tailed godwit, and then Cassell's bar-tailed godwit beat the lot. And the first one they found was going 7,700 miles. And then a bit later on in 2021, they discovered one which went even further, 8,100 miles. So it's a massive distance. When you're crossing the Atlantic at 600 miles an hour, or whatever it is, it takes, about 15, well, maybe 14 hours if you're doing it from Alaska to New Zealand. But if you're doing it at 50, 60 miles an hour, this bird takes 8 days and it still manages it. Just remarkable.
That's amazing. I have 2 maybe quick questions as we wind down here. One would be, it's more something for you to just to comment on. You've got these birds and the turtles and all that have all these features you just covered. Obviously, in supposed evolutionary history, there were creatures that had none of those things. They had to develop it over time. Well, what good if 15% of these features or 33%? There's kind of a generally all or nothing in many of these examples. So do the evolutionists try to comment on the advantages of these partial stages along the way?
I've never seen that done. I don't think migration has really been explained. The one who really goes into this in depth is Eric Cassell in his book Animal Algorithms, where he makes the point that you've been saying that you've got to get this right. You cannot afford to lose a generation because you're actually making life hugely difficult for yourself. And yet these young ones do it straight off. It's ingrained in them that they need to go. And if they didn't go, they would be in danger of not being able to propagate to the next generation because they need to have the food supply and they need to actually be able to propagate and have enough food. So clearly, these things can only be done by all these factors, but all these factors being taken account of. So if they're going to make a journey, they need a map, a compass, where they are on the map, the right way to fuel. If you get one of those wrong, you could end up in disaster. And if you don't migrate, you don't necessarily know where there is a location for other food supply. So you might say, well, could they not resort to some of the species not migrating? Well, they haven't got it in their little brains, as far as we know, to actually do anything different to what their parents did. So to say that one generation has suddenly got to change its behavior is probably going to lead to total disaster. So as far as I know, the evolutionists have not explained how this behavior has come about.
Sure. It's a little bit like butterfly metamorphosis, and you talk about all the stages, and I know you're very, very familiar with that as well. I like Paul Nelson's analogy of Houdini, who one of his acts was to be hung upside down, handcuffed, straitjacketed in a tank of water, and he escaped out of that. He was famous for that. Well, he didn't do that one portion at a time. He had to have a plan to get all the way through. If he only figured out how to get into the tank upside down with the straitjacket and water, he's dead. He won't live long enough to figure out the next stage. So he had to have a plan right from the beginning to get all the way through. With a butterfly has to get all the way through metamorphosis, or if it just gets hung upside down in a sleeping bag, it's not going to mate. It's not going to eat. It's going to die.
I love that illustration. That's a very good illustration of Paul Nelson.
Yeah, you did. Great job with that. So my last comment for you could add to, you did comment briefly about change of the Earth's magnetic field. Are you aware of any research that's been done as far as birds needing to make any adjustments with the half-life was about 1,400 years for the decay of the magnetic field. So it has changed since the flood, almost 4,500 years ago. Is there any indication that birds are adjusting to the weakening of the magnetic field?
In terms of the weakening of the magnetic field over a number of years, I don't think a study's been done on that, but we do know that not only does the magnetic field weaken, but the location of the pole, particularly the North Pole, is oscillating. It will start off a bit in Russia and then move towards Canada and so on. And it's changing its location, which affects what's called the declination angle, which is the angle between the geographic north and the magnetic north. So the birds seem to be coping very well doing their migrations, even though that magnetic north is changing a bit quite significantly from one year to another. So I don't think a study, though, has been done formally on that. I've not seen a study about bird migration in relation to the movement of the poles.
Sure.
But the very fact that they're carrying on doing it does seem to suggest that they're managing, doesn't it? And they're not sort of losing their way. The strength, I haven't seen a study on that.
Sure. No, it's all very, very fascinating. And again, we just are scratching the surface. So we thank you so much for taking your time to share this with the audience. I hope the audience wants to delve even deeper, and I'm personally looking forward to having you come back. And last time we were at a conference together, you were talking about feathers and bird wings and all that. That was absolutely fascinating. And then the whole bombardier beetle thing, I really want us to do a program on that in the future. So we appreciate you joining us. And for the viewers, again, this is not a live presentation, but it is archived. We want you to remember to check out Logos Research Associates website, logosresearchassociates.org. Also consider supporting some of the work that we're doing with the research projects that we have going on. You'll see those depicted on the website. Also subscribe to Logos Research Associates newsletter so you can be kept up to date with what's going on. And when you do that, you'll have a free subscription to Creation Evolution Headlines by David Coppage. That has just lots and lots of great information that will come free to you as well. And then again, this is obviously archived and available. Send links to your friends so that they can benefit from what Professor McIntosh has been sharing with all of us. And then our next presentation is going to be Wednesday, December 10th at 9 p.m. Eastern time. That's when we normally do these broadcasts. So Wednesday, December 10th, 9 p.m. Eastern Central Time, Eastern Time. It's going to be Biblical Archaeology with Dr. Randall Price. He is an unbelievable expert in that area. And basically the Bible makes claims about certain people's, places, events, and customs, and archaeology finds evidence for these people, places, events, and customs. But he's going to make it sound more interesting than I just did. That'll be another powerful presentation, so make sure you tune into that. So thanks again, Professor
Can I just
McIntyre.
say one last thing just
Sure.
before we go? Remember
Definitely.
what I said about the fact that you need a savior, and the one, remember I said that the map is the Bible. We need to believe the Bible, and we need to not get lost as we wander through life. We need to have a plan. We need to actually know the one who is the way, the truth, and the life. So although I've been talking about migration, and I've loved talking with Jay, whom I know well, Jay Sigert here, but, you know, guys, all of you who are listening, Logos Research Associates really wants you all to make sure that you believe in the Lord Jesus Christ, and you will be saved through what he did on the cross. I don't just want to tickle people's ears with science and interesting scientific facts. That's not really fundamentally what we're about. I love the science, but I want you to realize that it's loving the Lord Jesus Christ and what he did as our Redeemer which matters most. Thank you.
Very, very important. And as I close, I'll share a portion of an analogy that will just kind of reiterate what we just heard here about the importance of the gospel message. We can look at this scientific information all day long, all lifelong, which is great. But if you just look at the science, it can tell you there's got to be some kind of a supernatural force, some kind of a creative force out there. But you could look at dirt and DNA all day long, all lifelong, and it would never tell you who created it, why they created it, what they want from you, and what happens to you when you die. You can't get that from looking at the scientific details. The only way you could have answers to those questions is if whoever the creator is left you a note. And the Bible claims to be that note saying, hello, I'm the one who created it. This is why I created it. This is what happened to it. Here's my plan to fix it. And here's what happens to you when you die. The Bible makes that claim, which I could write a book tonight making every one of those claims. Problem is, I couldn't give you evidence that mine is true. The Bible gives us at least 4 different ways to know it's true, with internal consistency, historical accuracy, prophetic accuracy, and scientific accuracy. We've gone over a little bit of the science. Dr. Randall Price will go over the historical accuracy with archaeological evidence. So much evidence that the Bible absolutely has to be what it claims to be, the inspired, inerrant Word of God. And the most important message is that gospel message. It's all about Jesus Christ. So that's what our organization is ultimately all about, but we go through some of the science just to kind of point you to the authority of God's word. So thanks everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in our next program.
God bless.